Hey guys, Chris the Valley Guy here. We have a fountain again. They finally installed it after I don't know how long, 2 years since they got rid of it. So, we're gonna talk about batteries because, if you couldn't tell, I like batteries. Now, why do I think batteries are so interesting, and why do I think people should find batteries more interesting themselves? Well, it's because batteries are a very interesting concept. I mean, they've been around for thousands of years. You could probably find images online of the batteries that were in pots. They were like a cylindrical tube that went down in. I think they were lead and some type of low pH liquid that would act as an electrolyte. And it's interesting because it's a concept that's been around for a while. Something's biting me. And not only that, just think about the world today. Imagine a world without batteries. Imagine capacitors don't exist either, because realistically capacitors can't take the place of batteries, especially not to the degree that batteries do. So imagine a world without a world without batteries. A world without batteries would be a very different place. I would have to be using a camera that is completely wired to the grid system because it can't hold a charge. Because, there's no battery to power it. It's gotta all be grid tied. And that would probably mean that smartphones might not exist at all. It might just be landlines. I would just be using a camera that is constantly tied to the grid. And then it comes to cars. Like, you would legit have to hand crank start your car every time you wanted to start it. For bigger vehicles, like, buses and 18-wheelers, the amount of energy it takes to get those engines going is immense. You would legit have to have a grid-tied start motor. You couldn't go anywhere without grid power to start your vehicle. Unless it was a really small vehicle that could be hand cranked by most people. Or you. I mean, the only other way to do it is to make some type of engine system that powers the starter for the main engine. That'd be ridiculous. But instead, we just use batteries. Because batteries can put out a high amount of energy really quickly. At least lead acid batteries. What else would be different? Think about any electronic device. I've already mentioned smartphones, but imagine any electronic at all that doesn't... just think of any electronic device that isn't powered by the wall all the time. It has a battery. It wouldn't be able to be battery powered. You'd have to use grid. Just anything with batteries in it. If we couldn't have batteries, the world would just be a very different place. And it's impossible to deny that, because let's say somehow someone managed to find some way for supercapacitors. Alright, fine. There's a way to use capacitors to do things like maybe start cars and use cell phones, but they're not as good. They'd have to really develop on capacitors, and capacitors can get really expensive. If you don't know what a capacitor is, it's a little cylindrical thing that has two leads that go into a circuit board, usually. And it can hold charge. And it can drain all the way down to 0, and it can charge all the way up to 100%, have a larger cycle life, more cycles in their life, and they work fine. Why don't we use them more often? Because their actual capacity is not as great. Now, capacitors just aren't the future for things like off-grid situations, powering devices. Batteries have been the way for a few hundred years now. I think a few hundred, at least 100. I know at least 100. And as well, I lost my thought. Things that just like remotely controlled things. Like, I know that there are robots that are made to defuse bombs. I mean, those run off of batteries as well. You can't just run. People have solar houses, but what do you think powers those houses whenever the lights are out? I'm sorry, when the sun's not out. Yeah, I don't think you have to have that something to store that battery. And it's just all very interesting. Like finding ways to fit the highest density amount of energy at your preferred voltage into the smallest amount of real estate, or just building a system to where it has great capacity for current output as well as capacity. I mean, I build battery banks with AC outlets. If you ever want one, DM me on Instagram. I'll make you one for a good price. It'll actually be much better than anything you can buy. But that's why it's so interesting, because that's why I like doing stuff with batteries. Not only because they're extremely interesting, and the fact that like each of them have different properties and they work differently, but as well, the market's trying to scam the heck out of people. Like, if you go look on Amazon and you look for AC power bank, you're gonna find a power bank that's like $300, has a 65-watt outlet. That's nothing. And on top of that, it just isn't gonna be that great. It's not gonna have that great of capacity. It might be extremely cheap and efficient for them to produce, but they're making an extremely high profit margin off of them. If you want me to make you something custom, let me know. I will certainly do it, and I will charge like 15% profit. It might be the same price because you're getting way more, or maybe even more, but that's because you're actually getting what you're paying for. I could build the same thing for $300 with like 3 times the capacity and much greater output capabilities than 65 watts, at least 300. And I could do it pure sine wave or modified sine wave. I'll get into that in another video if y'all want. My dad's rolling up with the geese. But yeah, it's quite interesting stuff. So, yeah, that's why I like batteries so much, if that's what y'all are curious about. I guess I'll end the video here because my dad's probably going to come up and talk to me and interrupt the video. I don't feel like editing this. Thank you for watching, and goodbye.